Okay, we're recording now. Okay, so if you're following along at home, welcome back. This week we're going to cover, or this session at least, we're going to cover week 4 in the LinkedIn tutorial, and this is databases and migrations. Greg and I have already been doing a little bit of work there on our Recruit Tracker app, so that this will sort of reinforce some of that. Let me also bring up Recruit Tracker, and we can probably look at some migrations and things there. Apps, personal recruit tracker, and then we'll open that up. Okay, all righty. So we've discussed this some. The database.yaml file. This is very important. Let's see, it's in config database.yaml. So in the LinkedIn videos, he's using MySQL, and he does a little more MySQL stuff there, just to sort of show you that, you know, once you run the migrations, you can see that the tables have been created by, he just uses MySQL commands to actually log into MySQL, do show, and you can do all that in Postgres. We're using Postgres for ours. And in fact, I'm looking here, I'm actually not using Postgres. I'm using SQLite, but it's easy enough to swap that out once we go. And I don't know, Greg, did you use Postgres for your, what are you using for the Recruit Tracker?
But I was using Postgres, but I'm just pulling your from GitHub, so I think I'm probably grabbing that.
Yeah, and generally, I was gonna say, generally on shared projects like this, often the database.yaml is blank, and you leave that up to the developer to set that up. So it just depends on how uniform you're trying to be across your team. I mean, you know, the general rule is whatever's on production, you should probably have on development. Again, we're going to run this on Heroku, and Heroku uses Postgres, so we'll get Postgres set up. And in fact, that'll force us when we go to push this to Heroku, it's going to force us to set up Postgres. So I'm just going to wait until then. It's but again, that's the sort of flexible, nice thing about Rails and the ORM and the way it handles databases is it truly is database agnostic. So we could go in here and add MySQL. We could go in here and add Postgres. Now, when you start getting into, I haven't done as much. When you start getting into NoSQL stuff and Mongo and things like that, I think it's not quite as agnostic, and then that you can just swap things out, because obviously those are document-based. NoSQL is document-based versus relational databases like MySQL and Postgres, so it's not quite as interchangeable there. But with regard to relational databases, I think it's pretty you know, it's pretty flexible. So anyway, database.yaml's here. I mean, yeah, pretty straightforward. Notice there are development, test, and production sections of this file. This is just straight Ruby here. One of the things I think he points out in the videos is you can add, you know, this is just straight Ruby, so you can add put statements here or other things like that, although you wouldn't do it here. You do that migrations. But again, this is and in fact, now I'm saying that, no, this is actually not Ruby. This is YAML is what this is. That's why it's called database.yaml, and which is a sort of fairly common configuration standard. But again, separate sections here for database test and production, you know, in case you need different sets of users and passwords for those. Okay, what is a migration? So I'm just going to I made some notes as I watched the videos, and so I'll just sort of go through these and talk my way through, and we may look at some examples. So essentially, it's a set of database instructions, your application. I mean, generally, when you look at some JavaScript apps and single page applications and things like that, those are not always dependent on a database necessarily. But generally in Rails, when you talk about CRUD and those kinds of things, generally you're going to want to be saving information to a static database somewhere. That's sort of the whole point of what Rails does. So it's a set of database instructions to go along with your application. And if we go back in time 15 or 20 years ago, sort of at the dawn of web development, if you want to call it that, you know, the challenge was that you'd write this code and then just think, I mean, PHP is sort of what comes to my mind, but you've got this sophisticated PHP app and there's really no database instructions there. I mean, you just have to sort of know. You can keep your own documentation and you know what you've got locally, and so you make the production server look like what your local server is. But there's really, you know, I guess you would just come up with a text document or something like that just to share with other people what the specific database schema needed to be. But that was sort of the old way. So that's what led to this idea of, that's what led to this idea of, okay, if we can wrap up the structure of the database along with our application code, you've just got this nice tight package that includes all the application logic, but then also the database structure too, because without that, you know, unless you have that, you know what that is, your app's not going to run. So okay, so migrations, again, when we look at migration files, those are going to be in DB migrate. And for instance, we created at this point for our recruit tracker app, we've got 2 migrations. We've got our initial users migration that we created, just in this case, just has an email and password digest fields. You know, that was just sort of the first round of, we just wanted to create the user model and be able to create authentication, all those pieces. And then we went back and created this second migration file where we essentially added these various fields to our user model. And again, this idea here is this recruit tracker is going to allow us to, when new applicants come into Vets Who Code, they'll be able to fill in all of this information. And then on the admin side, one of our volunteers will be able to go back and look at all the information they've submitted and either approve their application or, you know, do various other things. But again, now this is straight Ruby here. And one of the points that he makes in the video is you can add put statements and things like that. So in these migrations run, if you want to output, you know, you can output various messages and things like that, or do other things. I mean, again, it's just Ruby, so you can call all kinds of methods to do, you know, again, generally Rails sort of at least leads you down the path of having you in a box of what you want to do. But again, it's just Ruby, so you can do anything you want. You create methods here and call other methods to other actions and things like that. But generally what you see here, I think most Rails devs keep it pretty simple and just stick to what stick to the basic configuration.
The idea there with those put statements or any of those methods is kind of to help me. It's not user interaction. I want to be able to, as the dev, see what's going on.
Yeah, this is purely right.
Debugging.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is all purely back end sort of programmer type stuff. The end user for your app, or, you know, from a web development, when you think about the actual website and what it does, none of the, you know, I mean, obviously it affects those things in that you're creating database fields to support the application, but anything more sophisticated in like that is purely for the developer and for the developer's pleasure and to make things easy for them. Okay, so set of DB instructions written in Ruby, migrate the DB from one state to another. So we've talked about that. The command to migrate the database is, you know, Rails DB : migrate. Rails DB : migrate. If you remember, we said that actually runs the migration. We'll talk. I've got some other notes about this, but, you know, generally when a migration is created, notice we get this time and date stamp here, and you can see these are all 2021, and then I don't know if that's a Julian date or what it is, but anyway, that's the specific time stamp for it. And then I've got a note for it here later, and actually in the database, I think I had forgotten that the example he uses in LinkedIn, he makes the point that there's a schema table. Let me see if I see it here in the file. Yeah, I'm not seeing it here, but there's okay, there's a schema _ migrations. And I think that's true for all. I know he mentions it in the context of MySQL, but I think that's true for all. I think that's true for all databases, whether it's Postgres or whatever. There's a schema migrations table that's kept up to date. So when a migration is run, that table is updated. So that's how Rails knows when a migration has been run. So for instance, if I look at our recruit tracker app now and I try to run Rails DB migrate. It's not going to run the migrations that have already been run. See, and in fact, I don't get any app. I would have sort of expected to say no migrations to run or something like that. But anyway, when it's affirmative, when it does run migrations, it'll give you some output. Notice we didn't get any output here. The reason it knows that it's already ran these migrations is because of that schema migrations table. And I don't know. Let's see, Rails. See, I'm curious if schema migrations. Let's see, schema migrations.last. No. Yeah, I was curious if we could possibly access that table from the Rails console, but yeah, I don't think it's plugged in that way. If we wanted to log into, well, in this case, we're using SQLite. We could log into SQLite and probably look at that table if we wanted to. But anyway, migration files are created. They're ran one time against the database that you're running, whether it's local or in production, and that's how Rails sort of keeps track of whether a migration has been run or not.
And is that also the way Rails would keep track of how I would maybe roll back or something?
That's right. We're going to talk about
down thing.
Yep, we're going to talk about the up and down state, right? And that, I think that schema migrations is really key there. That's always updated based on where you're at with regard to what migrations have been run.
Okay.
So I mentioned it's database agnostic. I just like saying the word agnostic, so you'll probably hear me say it a few more times. But it is database agnostic in that it doesn't care what I mean, to me, and that is that's one of the features I've always liked of Rails, this idea that it abstracts the database away from what you're doing. I mean, I say it does, it abstracts it. I don't say that in a negative way, like, well, you don't know what's going on with the database. You can not know what's going on with the database if you want to, but you don't have to wrap yourself up in that. I mean, if you've done database administration on an app that doesn't have an ORM, if I haven't explained the term ORM, that's object relational mapper is what that's called. And basically, I like to think of it as a set of middleware, or it's like the system or code that sits between the database and the application. But if you've ever done database administration on an app where you don't have an ORM that's sort of handling a lot of that, it's just you're living in almost two different worlds. You're having to talk to one another. And again, 20 years ago, all apps were that way. Now, almost all major software development frameworks have some kind of ORM that does a lot of that work for you. And it's just a more standard way to do it, rather than trying to depend on, okay, I've got to specifically go and create my databases and create all these tables, because again, there's so many options and things that you can have, and so much ambiguity, if you will, there, that I think it's just that's been the natural evolution of things. Is okay, we need to tie up the database schema and the database code. We need to sort of tie that in with the application that we're trying to run. Okay, includes up and down states, and then I don't do I haven't done a ton of this over the years. Again, I sort of trust Rails to do it, and for the most part, if you do it right the first time, you don't have to go back and touch things. But there are times when you need to roll back changes that you've made, and I mean, again, you can imagine a scenario where you roll out a new table, and then you decide, and maybe you'd even deploy that code to deploy it to your production server, and there's an issue or there's a problem, and you need to roll that back or roll back to a previous state. Then that's what the up and down statements. Now the point, and he points this out in the video, if you notice, all of the migrations we have are this change method, and essentially the change method encompasses both the up and down state. And I'm not going to say anything more about it than that, because I don't know. I would be speaking out of term or off if I did, because I just don't know it that well. But I do know the older versions of Rails, maybe Rails 3 and back, had up and down statements. But I mean, I think it's the whole, sort of the whole dry thing. You had a lot of repeated code there. Essentially, up would be, you would create columns or create
Right. Okay. Yeah.
tables, and then down was just a copy of that, but it was just a way to roll it back. So I'm sort of guessing that that's why they come up with this change method rather than doing up and down, having these separate up and down methods, because I think you had a lot of repeated code there. But you can, again, he points this out in videos, you can explicitly set up and down. And there may be, I don't know, again, I'm not even trying to guess the scenario when you would want to do that. But again, if you want control over that, there may be times where you would want your up statements, the creation of things to be maybe slightly different than what you would want the rollback, code to be.
Yeah.
Okay. DB schema.
So he kind of went down that road about you could do up and down and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I took that as was, if you wanted to do it, you could do it, but it was more of the inner workings of what the change method is it grabs both up and down, right?
Yeah, and I think again, generally the scaffolding, if you use Rails out of the box, it uses the change method now. For the most part, that's what folks stick with. So, okay. Okay, DB schema lives with application code, executable and repeatable, easily shareable. So I've sort of talked about that. Again, this idea, imagine a scenario where you didn't have migration files, where you didn't have database schema and application code wrapped up in your application code. You sort of have this separate, again, you just have to keep documentation of what the tables should be, what the different columns are going to be, what the different data types are going to be. So again, it just makes sense to have all that wrapped up in as part of your application rather than having it be separate. And again, this idea of it being executable, repeatable, and shareable. That's the nice thing is, okay, I've got my app, my Rails app in this case lives on GitHub. I can just pull that, clone that repository, run the migrations locally. Now again, you run into times if you don't, for instance, if you don't have Postgres installed and Postgres is what my application is using, then there are some system things you've got to get Postgres installed and set up and do all those things first. But again, once that is in place, all I need to do is run the migrations, and it's going to automatically create all the tables and the columns and do all the things that it needs to do to work. And it's pretty solid too. I mean, it's kind of cool that you can you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. That again, all you do is run the migration.
Well, and the beauty of it is it just if it doesn't lower it, it removes that barrier to entry of learning to code, right? I mean, I'm a new guy and I'm over here building stinking databases just by pushing a couple of things.
Learning SQL.
I kind of understand it, right? I mean, I'm getting into the SQL work.
Well, and you are, and then that's the thing too. Any, sort of like, I do some machine work and I do some welding too. And I can't remember if it was a machinist or the welder. I think it was the machinist that told me this, but he said, I don't know any good machinist who doesn't know a little bit of welding, and I don't know any good welder who doesn't know a little bit of machine work. So I think of SQL work and sort of web development coding the same way. I don't know of any good web developer that doesn't know the way around a database. Now that doesn't mean they're a DB admin or anything real sophisticated level like that, but they understand they understand tables and columns and attributes. They understand relationships and primary keys and those basic things. Okay, and then they make the point, or I've got a bullet here, allows for writing Ruby rather than SQL. Again, same thing there. Probably if your application gets sophisticated enough, and you don't have to go far down the road of it being a sophisticated app, you're probably going to have to write some SQL. But Rails will get you a heck of a long way there and get you really, really close. And in fact, I may be speaking out of term. I mean, I think in the past maybe you'd need to know some SQL, and I've written straight up SQL statements before, but again, you really don't want to do that. I mean, Rails is robust. The active record, which is the SQL library in Rails, active record is really robust enough to handle probably 95%, 98% of the queries you're going to want to do. And in fact, Rails is optimized, and active record is optimized such that it's going to probably do a better job of querying data than what your SQL statement is. I mean, I may be speaking out of term there, but I think I'm fairly safe in sense.
Yeah, and I'm remarkably fine with that, right? Like,
well, yeah, no, and
I don't want to
too.
try to figure.
Yeah, there are guys that are and gals that are smarter than us that have sort of solved that problem for us. So why not leverage that? Okay. All right. Okay. Generate migration. So again, we talked about this idea of generating migrations. We did this for our recruiter, our recruit tracker app. And again, the convention, Rails has a convention, a command line convention that will actually create the migration for you. And again, that is Rails G or Rails generate migration and then the migration name. So there's really two different ways, and he shows two good examples of that in the video. One is, and then Greg, that's the way we did it for ours, is hey, we just want to create the basic migration, and then we'll go back and fill in the blanks on the stuff that we want. So in that case, Rails G migration and then migration name, and essentially that will just give you, like I think for ours, when we ran that, it just gave us this, and then we went in and added this. This stuff, and that's just the way I do it, because I can never, number one, half the time I can't remember what the syntax is to actually pass in the columns and the data you want, and then number two, if I screw up the name, then it's created a bunch of code for me and I have to go in and fix it anyway. So I've just over the years I tend to just give me their migration file, and then I'll go in and fill in the stuff that I need. But so the other way to do it is do this Rails generate model and then model name, and this actually creates a model for you, so that's you can have a migration. So in our case, with the users table that we were at, or these user fields we were adding, we already had the user model in place, so we didn't need to do that. So that's why it was helpful for us to just do it, just have a blank migration for us to fill in the blanks. But you can do this Rails G model. It'll create a model for you in addition to the migration file, and then you can also pass in options to get to add specific column names to. And I think it's very similar to what the scaffolding is. Basically, it's just whatever the name is, and then I think string. If you leave it blank, it'll be a string by default, and then you can put a colon, separate it with a colon, and specify the specific data type you want. Okay, migrations have date and time stamp at the beginning of each file. We talked about that again. If you just look at the naming conventional on it, I think that's not just for from a human readable standpoint. You can look at it and see that, but again, I'm assuming that Rails also uses that to tell what's been ran and what's not been ran, or at least the order. I should say the order they've been ran in, because the order is important too, right? If you look at the two migrations we've got, if Rails tried to run this migration first before it ran the create users migration, well, that'd be a problem because there's no user table there yet. So the order, that date and time stamp is important for the order, so Rails knows the correct order to actually run migrations in. Let's see, migrations have date and timestamp, talked about that. Create table or add column. Right, so here you can either, there's a bunch of different options you can do. You can create and add columns. You can drop or remove columns. You can rename a table, rename a column. So these are all things you need to do. And again, if you just think about it logically, over time, your database is going to change. I know we're going to add an admin field, so that's something we're going to want to do, but we may, over time we may go back and look at look at these fields that we've added, and the pre-work link or the pre-work repo link, we may either want to remove those, or maybe because of a naming convention or the way things change in the organization, we might want to change those columns names. So again, all the normal stuff you need to do in the course of database management. You've got migration files that you can create to do those things. Another thing that's cool is, over a course of time, you can look at the migrations and sort of see how things have changed over time. And I mean, just to give you an idea, let me look at one of my more sophisticated applications. Ask, it's probably the biggest one. We'll look at, I mean, these are going to be so huge. So these are all the migrations for this application.
Yeah, wow.
You know, they started back in 2012. And so we can see that we've added, you know, questions, ratings, comments, create counties. You know, this specific app has a bunch of location-based stuff. So we've created counties. We got FIPS IDs, look, state FIPS, added groups, you know, versions, widget locations. So you can go back and look at all this stuff. You know, here we can see some actual SQL that's being, so you can put, you know, rather than the standard Rails stuff, here we have some specific SQL that we needed to run inside a migration file. I mean, the other thing that's important too here, add, you know, this one's called add initial response fields. I don't know, I have to go back and look and see what this does, but you know, sometimes there's a job you need to run on the database, maybe to clean some data up or to do something. You could just log in, and this was done on the production server. You could just log in and do it manually, go in and, okay, this is just a one-time thing that I need to run to either clean up some data or maybe add some things. Rather than manually do it, put it in a migration file, because again, it's number one, if everybody's local environment, you know, is sort of up to date and you're trying to keep everybody on the same page, you're going to want your other devs in your team to run this same job or this same action against the database. But not only that, if you ever need to recreate the data from scratch, you need to recreate the production server. Again, any little jobs like this, put it in a migration file, because not only is it from a consistency standpoint, it's going to give you a more consistent development or production environment. But again, just from the history of it, this is nice stuff to go back and look at 2 or 3 years down the road. If you're having an issue, you know, you were like, you know, there's some SQL job that we ran one time and maybe we removed some fields or maybe we cleaned some data up. Oh yeah, I've got a migration file that we actually put that code in. So you can actually go back and look at what you did. So it really gives you a good snapshot over time of how your data and your database can change.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. Okay. So column t dot timestamp. So if you notice, by default, this t dot timestamps is there in all the initial files here. That's what the updated, that automatically adds the updated and created app columns for all of your data. And that's, again, it's just, well, it is what it says it is. It's when a new record is inserted into the database, you've always got to create it at date, and then anytime anything's updated there, that updated at gets modified.
Yeah, and that's not mandatory, so I can take that out of there and we can still run on.
You can. I mean, again, I can't come up with this scenario. I mean, generally, you would not want to do that, because it's always good to have it there. But yeah, if you want to, you can, and that'll remove those 2 fields. ID column, database folks, if you know about databases, you know every table has an ID column in it. Well, where is that at? Rails has that there by default, even though you don't see it inside the migration file. It's there by default. And again, if we look at go to Rails. And if I do user.last, maybe, you know, notice I've got this ID field here. In this case, it's 2. It's generally sequential. So this was the second user that I created. And then also notice we've got our updated, notice we've got our created at and updated at fields here too.
Right. So those, so the user ID is not specifically in the migration file. Rails does it somewhere else. And that created at and updated at are the timestamps, the t dot timestamps on line 8 of your code back there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. You don't need to specify. Okay. Running migrations. Okay. Migrate. Remember we said, actually, again, to run migrations, we actually run Rails db:/migrate. That runs any migrations that have not been run. So again, you can run that anytime you want, and it'll show you. He mentions some other cool ones I didn't need to actually try on. Let's try them right now. Rails db migrate status. Let's see what that does. Maybe it'll show you what's been run and what's not. Yeah. So it shows you what database you're running locally, status, migration ID, and then migration name. And notice these are all up. I'm assuming if they had been rolled back, then we would see down there. But that gives you a status of what's been run up to this point.
And is that migration ID? It looks like it's the beginning of the DB migrate.
Yeah, it looks. I'm assuming it's the same. It's that date,
like that timestamp.
Date and timestamp. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's where I could roll back using that migration ID.
Right, and I think he specifies that in the videos that you can go back to a certain point in time if you want to roll back to a certain migration timestamp. You can do that, which is can be handy. I mean, it makes my head hurt to think about that because what if you're doing that kind of thing, you've probably got some bigger problems. So I've probably been in migration hell is probably what I'd call that. But if you're at a point where you're trying to go back to different states and time, then you probably got some issues going on.
Yeah, I've been in the corner sucking my thumb crying for a while before I actually get up in there and do it, right?
Yeah, that being said, it's better to have the ability to do it than to not have the ability to do it. So if you need to go back to a known good state, then that's certainly a way to do it.
Well, I appreciate you putting context about it, because in that lesson he was like, "Oh, cool, like, yeah, man, if you need to roll back, it's no big deal. You just go back, But put that context
probably is a big deal if you're, especially from production, and like we're not even adding Git into this. You can roll back to a different Git, a different snapshot and point in time in Git, which is just your code, but that's when you start to mix in, well, what about migrations? It's one thing to say, okay, I'm just going back to a certain point in time. If the database hasn't changed, but going back to a previous state in time where the migration, you're at a different spot with the migration too, that's just adds another layer of sophistication to it all. So yeah, it's fun. Okay, DB migration status. I threw these in. I've used Rails DB reset before. You can essentially, that resets. I mean, often I do it a bunch. It's probably bad practice, or it probably means I've jacked something up. But I'll often, hey, I want to throw away everything I've got on my local environment. I'm not doing this in a production environment, but in my local environment, especially in the early phases, like now, what we're doing, there'll probably be a time in the Recruit Tracker app. Well, okay, let's, maybe we forgot to add an initial field to the migration. Even though we've got these two migrations that are sort of set in time, we can go back and modify these. Let's say we decided we want that admin flag. We want that from the outset. We could go in and add it to this initial users table that we created. Then we could do DB reset, which is going to, I'm always confused about exactly what it does. It should drop and recreate the databases, but actually you can run drop. I think there's a drop command too, rake DB drop, which drops all the tables and drops all the data in there. Then you can run your migrations again from scratch. So there's all kinds of little DB commands that you can run to get all kinds of things. And then he mentions he mentions the version too, that again, I think you mentioned that there's a specific version you want to roll back to, Rails DB migration version equals, and then put that timestamp in, and it'll roll your migrations back to that date and time.
Okay. And then so with that reset command, like I'm always jamming some test user in there, and 2 days later I forget about it, right? So I jam another test user in there. So I think in the database right now there's probably half a dozen test users or something, and that reset kind of cleans that.
That's the way you can go in, right? That's the way you can go in and drop all that data. And I think there's a command that, like, if you don't want to like drop the tables and actually recreate the columns, if you just want to drop the data in the table, and the reset may do that. Again, I'd have to go back and look, but there's commands to do all of that, depending on whether, okay, I just want to blow the data that's in there away. I don't want to actually drop the tables, or if you just want to drop everything completely and recreate it from scratch, you can. Okay. But yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it's for. Now, we don't talk about, and I don't think he mentions being able to seed the database, but there's a rake DB seed, which, it's good practice, and it's nice to have. Folks don't always do it because it's just work to have to maintain it, but if you want an initial version of your application such that you've got populated data there, you can create what's called a seed file, and it'll do sort of what, not only resetting the database and dropping data, but you sort of bring it back to a good known state. Maybe,
Okay.
for instance, an example of our recruit tracker app, let's say we wanted 3 or 4 applicants to be in the database already, and we want an admin user set up for us that's already ready to go with a known password. We could create a seed file, and we could run that each time, and it would sort of take you back to that known state.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, that's all I have on migrations lecture-wise. Any questions, comments?
You know, my only hesitancy anytime I mess with a database as a new guy is that I'm going to break it and zero it all out. So that's my my only hesitancy with a database. Is like, if I start poking around in here, I'm going to break something.
Well, and don't, so, you know, I mean, so again, let's make sure we're clear about production versus development environment. Obviously, on the production environment, you should be that way. And generally, you should never touch. Now, I do it on our servers in my production environment, but you know, it's a bad practice to do it. You should do everything through migrations. You know, as far as any kind of database change. And I should say I'm bad for going in and poking around. I don't change any database schema, like I don't add tables or do anything like that, but I will delete records and do those kinds of things. And I mean, we do it so often, it would be silly to go in and create a migration file each time to do that kind of stuff. So I shouldn't necessarily apologize for it. But to your point about being hesitant, like, don't be afraid to do that in your local environment, because you can always fix that. Now, certainly, you know, in a production environment, you don't want to be doing that, because that's, you know, you cause yourself a lot of headaches.
Yeah, we're gonna break everything that in.
Yeah, and it sucks.
On the local, get after it.
Yeah, when you've got, you know, a dozen or 100 or thousands of users that can't get work done because you went in and did something dumb, that's no fun.
Yeah, draw a lot of attention that way.
It happens. I blew away our last stupid thing I did like that. I blew away our mail server at the organization I'm in, and like, I did it in AWS has a terminate. You know, you can check the box beside the instance of the server, and you can restart it or bring it down or do whatever. But, you know, AWS doesn't have a trash folder, which I argue that they should. I don't know why, but if you blow away a server, it's gone. If you click the destroy button, or I think terminate is the language they use, but if you terminated it, it's gone. There's no getting it back. And it was about a 7-hour ordeal to get it back up. And it was one that I didn't create to begin with. A previous senior engineer had created to start with, so I didn't have the benefit of, you know, having created it myself. But I got it done, and I'll never blow away a Amazon server again. A lot like that.
Yeah, right.
Knock on wood.
Lesson learned. Aye. Yeah.
Well, and actually, what I did is that they have termination protection is what they have, which is just its checkbox. If you turn termination protection on, then it allows you to not terminate or completely blow. If you try to terminate it, it'll say, nope, sorry, you have termination protection on. So I went in and turned on termination protection on all the critical servers. Okay. Okay, let's do this. If you can share, let's see if you can share your screen. Let's have you share your screen. Let's have you pull down the branch that I was working on, and let's see if we can, there we go. So let's do git branch, so just so I can see where you're at. All right, so let's so have you done git pull yet?
Yes, I did git pull to get it all updated. So I did the recruit tracker one.
Well,
I'm as updated
just
as
do
I
git
need to
pull.
be.
Well, just do git pull with no, just do git pull just like that. Let me see what you get.
So it gives me the old remote deal there.
Okay.
So I went and did this
okay.
one, and then actually, sorry, I did this one. And it gave me all these. This is where I got this, right? So when I did
Okay,
this
well,
just a little while
so that,
ago,
yeah, so you need
right?
to pull my brain. You need to specifically pull. I thought maybe it would, and I'm always confused about that. Yeah, so I pushed a new branch up. That was the test branch that I pushed, and just so you can see that, let's go ahead and look at that while we're here. So I added a test. Let's go to,
Yeah, there was this.
yeah, go and look
It
at,
has this, the branch here, right? Test models, user
yeah.
test.
So go ahead and open that file just so we can look at it. I just wanted to sort of put the basics in place. So testing is obviously important. I say that sort of not tongue in cheek necessarily, but just to say that, like, you know, it's hard and it's just another thing that you have to manage. But the sooner you go ahead and do it, and the sooner you have at least the wiring in place for it, the better. So that was all this. That was all this branch was just, okay, we got some wiring in place so we can do some tests here. And then I added a line to the README file to remember how to run tests, because I never remember how to run them. So if you go to the README file and look, so run tests. So go ahead and copy and paste that into your console and let's run that.
So this here, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll see all green.
So it's got this.
There we go.
So
and you see green dots, so we can do. And let's add another. Yeah, and you can see. So let's add another test, just so you can see how it works. So let's go to user tests. So, and just to review these. So, for instance, the first test, you can see these are essentially set up like methods, right? In fact, they are. I think they are methods. They all begin with test, and then it's test, and then whatever the test is going to do. So some kind of semi-detailed description of what the test does in quotes, and then you got to do keyword, and then we sort of do our test inside there. So for instance, and so up top we've got one where it says should not save user without email. So in this case, and again, you can do all this from the console too. And in fact, why don't you do that? Let's go to Rails C, just so we can sort of test. And you can, if you do the commands there, just like you see them up there. So for instance, do user equals user.new, and then do user.save, and you did use.
I got use, but
which is fine. You can still
use.save.
Save. You know, you should see, we should get false there. And so so what that assert does is, an assert statement just is testing whether a command or a statement is true or false. So in this case, assert not says that user.save should return false. And just as you saw there in your console, indeed it does.
Okay, so then for the second one, the second test here, what you're saying is, as I walk through this in this do in block, you're going to do a user, you're going to make a new user, then you're going to make sure to put an email and a password, and then you're asserting that it should save.
Yep.
Okay.
So now let's create one that we actually, we've got a test case. Sort of, we sort of jumped ahead of ourselves here. We could test for, let's the more tests the better, and they're free, right? So let's create two tests. Let's create one that tests that a user will not save unless it has a email, and that it won't save without a password. Because really the first test is sort of flawed, right? Well, you know what? I think that one's fine. I like the idea of having. Let's create one where we create an email for the user, but we don't create a password. So the test would be should not save without password.
So is this generally, like, is the convention written in should save user with password or should not save user without password?
I don't, at least as far as I'm concerned, I'm not, we don't have to be that specific with it. But I mean, in this case, yeah, it's going to be it's going to be a negative test, right? I mean, the assert statement is going to be false. So in that case, I would say it should be should not. So should not save without password. Yeah. Yep. I was going to say I would just copy all that and paste it in and then modify it.
And then so for this, I got to just check to see if they have this or I don't know how to.
So in this case, we want to create a user that does not have a password, right? Because that's what we're going to test for. So yeah, I would just remove that. I mean, the other option you could do, and to be honest, I don't know if that would work or not, is just pass a blank password in. But I think the right way to do it would be no. I think the right way would do it would be to do what you've got there and
just go like that. Yeah.
Password, and then that should return false. And so if you run those tests now, you can run that, and we should get a. Yeah, so we got three passing tests there. Now, one of the things we haven't did is added any password complexity, but we won't worry about that right now. I'd rather spend a few minutes we got left.
Yeah, we start hacking into regex and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah, well, we'll add that in, and when we do, and in fact, what we can do is some test-driven development there, right? We'll create the test first, and then we'll go in and write the code to make the test pass. And that, if you've heard of, I'm sure you've heard of test-driven development before, but that's basically what it is hey, we're going to create these tests first, and then we're going to go in and write the code to actually make the test pass. Okay. All righty. So that's that. Now, let's have you check out the branch that I pushed up. I would just go to GitHub and look and see what I named it. I could probably tell you what it is, but it'd be easier just to go there and look. And check out that branch. I'm always confused. You should be able to, just so you know, we won't spend time with it right now, but your repo should be able to have it set up such that when you do git pull, it'll pull down any new branches that are there. So yeah, locklear flesh out user is what I called that one.
And so all I'm going to do is git pull this, right?
Yeah, I think you just do git pull and then the branch name. I don't think that's going to do it. That's because you're not getting the branch name. All you did was pass in the yeah. See,
so I have to git checkout.
Yeah, git checkout and then the branch name. And I don't think you do the branch keyword, although you might. But I think I thought it was just branch name. Now that's not. If you notice what you're pasting in there, that's just the recruit track. And all that is the repo. You need that. You need the actual branch name.
This branch name here.
Yeah. I don't know if there's an easy way to.
Well,
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
I think that. Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah. And if we do get branch, okay, so you're in there now. All righty. So now, let's see. What I like to do when I check out a branch like this, just so we can look at the files, you can see what I've added. You can do Git Diff main. Do Git Diff main. So I added I can't even remember why I added that. Well, I think that was our test, right? That so it's XML gem is that was the testing stuff.
Okay.
So scroll down. Yep. Keep going. Or is that it? There you go. Well, yeah, keep going. I'm looking for the controller stuff. And
yeah, so here's a little bit of it, right?
yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah. So I added edit actions. Well, in fact, let's do this. Let's look at the file. What file is that? That's in the users controller.
Yeah, it says here users controller.
Right. So I've added, I added that's the users controller. So we can go in there.
So this is in the test one. We don't want to be in the test one for it.
No, yeah, no. We need to be in the users, like the regular users.
In
controller.
this one, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
So I added edit actions. I added edit and update actions here, and I think I added a before filter too. And then I added a couple of view things too. Let's just go ahead and run the app, and let's look at what we've got when we actually look at the different users. So go ahead and log in. Actually, you probably don't even have to log in, but because I don't think I've got any authentication on it. But it'd be good to test that out. So that's the other thing we want to add to our tests is like exactly what you're doing now. We should have a user creation test that's gonna, a sign up test. We should have a login.
All right.
Test.
So I go to, yeah. So when I go to log in here, oh, there we go.
And then go to / users.
Oh, it took new here. Hold on.
Yep. Okay, now I'm surprised. I thought that worked on mine. What is Q? So go back, go in your.
You know what I did is I jammed that. I fat fingered that dude in there. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah. There we go.
So I added this index. So this is the index action for the users model. And then I've got a show and a test there. So click on show and let's see if that works. Okay, that looks good. And now let's go back. And then let's try edit. Okay, and so we can update. So let's add a name here and do update user. And then, so did it update it? Because I'm not saying that doesn't look like it did.
No, it doesn't look like it. User was successfully updated, but the name files are not.
And just refresh that just for kicks and make sure. Yeah. So let's do this. Let's go back in again. Let's go back, go to the index page, and let's update it again, and let's change it, and then let's see.
Okay, so let me just do one name, see if it'll.
Well, I don't think that's the issue, but I want to look in the console and see what the console says. Okay, now don't. Well, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, go ahead and do whatever debugging you want. I was going to go to the console and let's look and see what was happening there.
Okay, well, we'll do that.
Go to the server console and let's see.
Yeah, so here.
So so there's the show action. We want to go to the update and see what happened. Okay, so see that red? That's telling us that red error there.
Yeah, okay.
So that is I think that's our whitelisting doohickey thingy in Rails, and we need to actually add task controller. So let's go to our users controller, and yeah, you're there, and go down to the user params, all the way down at the bottom.
Okay, here.
So right now we're requiring, so this is, again, I won't go into any detail, and I'll probably say it wrong anyway, but anyway, this is sort of our white listing that allows us to edit fields in the database. And yeah, you're right on track. We just need to add anything that we add or anything we want to be able to modify and update. That field name needs to be added to this user params method. Okay. And is it name? or is it
So
something else?
I would verify that. Hold on. So I've got where I want to look at is the database itself, right?
Well, there's a couple of different things you could do, yeah. But well, you were close. What did you just close? That's the other thing you do is just go there and look, right?
Right. So I
Now,
got first name, last name,
yep. So I would go ahead and update all those now.
And what you're
we know
saying
we're going to
is
want to
update here in the
Yep.
user params.
Yep, we need to add those there.
All right. So for the sake of time, we'll just do first name and last name, and then
Yeah, I would do that. And
figured
if
out,
you
I
want to
can
go back, yeah,
come back and
go
figure
back
the rest
later.
of these out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got first name and last name in there. And then I want to go here. So where is this page coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what this. It ain't user test. Where is that update coming from? Here. So this is users one edit action. So if I go into, because it only says name here.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I go to change it, it's not. So let me make sure I got my, what is it giving me here again? Right. So layouts, application. So it's not throwing an error here.
No, but you can see what's loading. So for instance, you go to the page you want to know where it's coming from, and then look at the console and see the last page that loaded.
So this page here,
Now,
right?
Now, because you're using the back arrow, you're just loading from memory. You're not actually getting a fresh request from the server. So I would refresh it there. Now, if you go to hold on. Now I would go to if you want to know where this page is at, go to the console now before you make another request. Yeah.
Yeah. So I refreshed. And what I did was I refreshed here. This is the page itself, right? And it's coming from user controllers edit.
Well, that's the action.
That's the action
in the controller. And now if you want the view,
so that's this thing, right? And then because I want this one, I'm going users controller set user, and then I'm rendering this edit.html.
Yeah.
And then so in users edit.html is this one.
Yep.
So here's where I'm doing this, right? And then so I want to call this first name, and I want the text field to be first name.
Yep.
And then when I go back here and I refresh, it's going to say that.
And we know it's working. Notice it pre-populated it for you too.
Yeah, because it pre-populated here.
That's sort of. But I would go ahead and change it and hit update, and let's see if it changes. And yeah, it looks like
it there it is. Yeah. Okay. All right. So to come back here at the users, we're using this action itself.
Now the action is not
controller.
Yeah, the action, notice there's nothing in it. It's really just a placeholder. And in fact, I'm pretty sure you could comment that out entirely if you wanted to, because the edit action is one of the 7 default actions that Rails uses. It's sort of explicit. You don't even need it there. But it's associated with that view too. And generally, it's good convention to leave it there just so you can see it. Even though it's blank.
And so the actual editing is happening here in the view.
Well, when you say the actual editing, I don't know what do you mean actual editing? I mean the view is like when you go ahead.
So when I'm changing this, when I update this to.
So right now you're seeing that edit.html.erb. And then when you hit that update user, that's actually calling the update action. So this data from this edit view is being sent over to your update action. And if you want to look at the update action in the controller.
So the update action, that's where this is.
So there, and then if user dot update, that says, hey, if there's an update, then whatever the update is, that's what the user params are being sent. You can look in the Rails console if you want, and you could see whatever updated data you put would show up in the console.
Yeah, so
you would see it being sent.
Okay, so let me, all right, so I just refresh it here and I've got John in there. So that's this refresh.
User controller edit, right? Yep.
Now, if I go and change this to, and I update, it's going to spit that out. Now in the console, I should be able to see where, so here is the,
yeah, so
right,
up
so
top
here's
there,
where it did this here.
Yeah, and there, in fact, even up higher than that.
Oh yeah, even here.
Params are, yeah, see, there's the new update, the new text, Billy, that you sent. And then you can actually see the SQL that's being run once it's inserted. Yeah, you can see the insert or the set statement that update users set up updated at. Notice our updated at field, that timestamp is being updated to, in addition to inserting addition to inserting the new text.
Okay, got it.
And then I think it redirects us back to the show action. So that's what you see there. That's where you see the user show.
That's this line 34 here in the user, in the update method.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay. So your assignment would be to go in and go ahead and add all those fields. So you can, and go ahead and, I mean, again, yeah, depending on how much time you've got, just go back to the users, go to / users up top in the URL, yeah. So the end goal would be to have all of our users listed here. We could also manually, I mean, right now we've got a sign up process. So maybe, we may or may not want that new users link there. And in fact, it probably doesn't even work now, I would think, but well, yeah, it looks like it does. It essentially just calls a sign up, but I don't know, is there ever a reason we would want to manually create a user? Maybe. I guess maybe from an admin standpoint, yeah, it would give us an interface.
Yeah, from an admin, maybe.
User. Yeah. So we may, but that's one thing to test, get all that working, get the show. Right now, it looks like the show and the edit, you just need to flesh out the rest of the edit functionality so we can edit all the fields. But the other thing is sort of update all the links on the pages so you don't have to go to the URL each time. So for instance, like right now, if you go to show, can we get back to the index page? And I don't think we can, show, yeah, see, we can't really get back to our index page.
No. Yeah.
Profile is broken. So so there's just a couple of things to sort of clean up,
fix. Poking around in here.
Yeah. And it's just, and again, it's all, all the codes there on various pages, you should be able to figure it out. And like I say, if all else fails, go back to your scaffolding. If you've got like the task application that we created, or even just create a new app and use some scaffolding to create a new model that gives you all the edit and the update. And lots of times for something like this, that's what I'll do, is I'll just go back to the scaffolding on some other app and just, because again, it gives you all the code there, and then just drop it in your app and make it all work.
Okay.
So the goal Wednesday would be, let's see how far you can get there, but I think Wednesday it's a reasonable goal to have it so we can modify users. And again, we're approaching this right now. There's really no auth taking place. We're just focusing on the user model itself and being able to update all the fields. Next step would be to add an admin Boolean field so we can designate who administrators are. And administrators will be able to view all users, sort of like the view we have now. And then we need to think about limiting the view of editing a profile. We should just, when you log in as Billy, let's say, Billy should only, when they go to edit, or when they go to their profile, even they should only be able to edit their data,
Only be
not
able to
all
see
the
their
user.
thing.
Yeah, only see their user data.
Okay.
All righty.
That seems like enough.
Okay. If yeah, I was gonna say that's plenty for the for not just for Wednesday, but for the rest of the week. But anyway, ping me in Slack if you have any problems.
Sure will.
Okay, cool. Thank
All
you.
right. Good to see you.
Later.